Introduction to the protagonist. Her name was Aisha, a woman whose very existence seemed to defy the norms that society had carefully constructed for her. She had always been different, not in a rebellious sense, but in the way she carried herself, with an independent spirit that couldn't be easily tamed. Growing up in a conservative, traditional household, Aisha quickly learned that expectations were high for women. Like most girls, she was expected to marry young, settle into a comfortable, predictable life, and above all, uphold the dignity of the family name. From a young age, Aisha was never the perfect daughter according to societal standards. While other girls were learning to cook, keep house, and tend to the needs of their families, Aisha was more interested in books, science, and exploring the world beyond her small town. She excelled in school, not for the sake of impressing anyone, but because she was genuinely curious. Her ambitions were unconventional. She dreamed of becoming an architect, traveling the world, and living life on her own terms. Her parents, especially her mother, always worried about her rebellious nature. "What good will come of all this studying, Aisha? You should be thinking about marriage, about settling down, not about building a career," her mother would often say. Aisha's father, though more supportive of her ambitions, was still bound by the societal pressures of their culture. Despite his quiet approval of her educational pursuits, he would frequently remind her that her future was to be defined by whom she married, not by the career she built. By the time Aisha was in her mid-20s, the pressure became overwhelming. Her relatives, neighbors, and even close family friends would often bring up the topic of marriage. "Aisha, you're such a smart girl, but why haven't you settled down yet? You're not getting any younger," they would ask with sympathetic smiles, as if they were doing her a favor by reminding her of the clock ticking. As she got older, the pressure from her family and society only intensified. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about her life, especially her marriage. The notion of a woman being content without a husband was seen as a threat to the fabric of tradition. Aisha's refusal to follow the typical route, to get married to someone her family deemed suitable, became the subject of scorn. Her cousin Sarah, who had married young and started a family, would often tell Aisha with a mocking tone, "You'll never find anyone as good as the ones we have in this town. You're just too picky." Other friends, who had already married and had children, expressed doubt about Aisha's choices. "You know, Aisha, your education won't matter when you're older and alone," they would remark. Despite this, Aisha remained unfazed. She refused to compromise her ideals just to fit into the mold that society had designed for women. She believed that marriage, when it came, should be based on love and mutual respect, not societal expectations. Yet, deep down, the constant mockery and doubt wore on her, making her question whether perhaps they were right. Could she truly build a life of happiness without adhering to the same conventions everyone else followed? But Aisha was determined. The ridicule she faced only served to strengthen her resolve. She didn't care if society laughed at her choices. She was certain of one thing: she would make her own path, one that no one could laugh at in the end. The proposal. Aisha had always prided herself on making decisions that felt right to her, regardless of what anyone else thought. But when the marriage proposal arrived, it was unlike anything she had ever expected. It wasn't from a wealthy man, nor was he someone from a prestigious family. Instead, it came from Saif, a man who worked as a mechanic, with a humble background and a modest income. Aisha had met Saif a few months prior when she had taken her car in for repairs. He wasn't tall or particularly handsome, but there was something about him that struck her as genuine. Saif was kind, thoughtful, and had a quiet strength about him that set him apart from others. They had spoken briefly during that first encounter, and over time they had developed a connection, one that was based on deep conversations and shared values, not the flashy exterior that society often valued. Aisha admired Saif's humility and his ambition to work hard and build a life on his own terms. Saif's proposal came on an ordinary day, in an unexpected manner. He handed her a simple, delicate ring as they sat on a bench in the park where they had often met after work. There were no grand gestures or expensive gifts. Instead, it was an honest moment between two people who had found comfort in each other's presence. He asked, Aisha, would you be willing to take a chance on me to build a life together? For Aisha, the proposal wasn't about status, wealth, or the expectations of others. It was about the connection they shared and the love that had blossomed in a quiet, unexpected way. But when she brought the news to her family, her joy was met with ridicule and disbelief. Her mother, who had always envisioned her daughter marrying a man from a well-to-do family, nearly choked on her tea. A mechanic? She asked, her voice incredulous. Aisha, you can't seriously consider this. You're throwing your future away for someone who fixes cars for a living? Her father, though generally more open-minded, couldn't hide his disappointment. Aisha, he's a good man, but what about your career? What about your future? This is not the match we had in mind for you. Aisha's cousins, who had always compared her to other women in the family, joined in with their own mockery. What's next, Aisha? Are you going to settle for a simple man who doesn't even have a university degree? What about the lifestyle you deserve? Even her closest friends, who had always been supportive, now turned against her. Saif might be a nice guy, Aisha, but what can he offer you? One friend asked with a raised eyebrow. He doesn't have a stable job, and you're talking about a future where you'll be the one supporting him. Is that what you want? Their words stung, but they didn't shake Aisha's resolve. She knew the path she was walking wasn't the one they expected. In their eyes, Saif was unsuitable because he didn't fit into the mold of a traditional husband. He wasn't wealthy, he didn't come from a prominent family, and he wasn't part of the circle they had deemed acceptable for her. But Aisha had long realized that marriage was not about financial security or meeting societal standards. It was about partnership, love, and mutual respect, qualities that Saif had in abundance. As the mocking voices around her grew louder, she felt more certain that the decision she was making, despite all the ridicule, was the right one. Though her family and friends couldn't see it yet, Aisha believed that love wasn't about what others saw as suitable. It was about finding someone who understood you, someone who was willing to walk beside you, no matter the hardships or judgments from the outside world. And in Saif, she found that person. Social pressure. The whispers began almost immediately after Aisha had shared the news of her engagement to Saif. At first it was just a few offhand comments, but as the weeks passed, the gossip grew louder, more relentless. Everywhere she went, the chatter followed her, from her family gatherings to the grocery store, and even in the hallways of her workplace. It was as if her very decision to marry Saif had become a topic for public debate. Aisha's relatives, many of whom had already married into well-established families, made no attempt to hide their judgment. Aisha, dear, do you know what you're doing? Her aunt, a woman who had spent her life meticulously maintaining her family's image, asked with an air of condescension. You're throwing away all the opportunities you've worked for. You deserve better than him. Her cousins would comment about the proposal, their eyes full of disbelief. A mechanic? Her cousin Zara would say, shaking her head. He doesn't even have a college degree. He's not the kind of man you should be marrying. You could do so much better. Aisha's friends, too, began to question her decision. For years, they had supported her ambition, but now, when it came to her choice of a life partner, the very essence of her independence seemed to lose its shine. You're kidding, right? Her friend Misha asked, scoffing when Aisha shared more details about Saif. He's not even in a secure job. You'll be the one holding everything together. What's the point of that? You could have someone who has more to offer you, someone who can give you everything you want. As the criticisms mounted, Aisha found herself cornered by society's unspoken rules, rules that demanded women marry men of a certain status, with the right job, wealth, and social standing. Those who didn't meet these standards were viewed as failures, or worse, as people who would bring shame to their families. The idea of marrying a man who worked as a mechanic, who didn't fit the traditional mold of what was considered successful, was seen as a choice too far removed from the status quo. Aisha felt the weight of these expectations like a heavy chain. It wasn't just her family and friends who doubted her choice, but also the community at large. When she went out for a walk, she noticed the sidelong glances, People in her neighborhood would whisper as they saw her pass by with Saif, making remarks about how he didn't belong to their circle. She overheard comments like, "Doesn't she know what she's doing? He's not even well off enough to take care of her." The constant barrage of judgments began to take its toll on Aisha. She found herself second-guessing everything. Was she really making the right choice? Was her love for Saif enough to withstand the pressure to conform? Everyone around her seemed to agree that she was making a mistake. Even her own parents, though they had initially accepted her decision, began to express their growing concerns. "Aisha, you know we only want the best for you," her father said one evening, his voice filled with quiet apprehension. "You're throwing away your future for someone who doesn't have anything to offer. What will people think of you when they find out? You could be with someone who is better suited for you, someone who will help you succeed." Each word felt like a sting, and Aisha began to wonder if perhaps her family was right. Maybe the life she had dreamed of, a life with Saif, wasn't enough. Maybe they were all right to question her decision. The weight of her community's expectations loomed over her every moment, and the fear of disappointing her family, of becoming the subject of even more gossip and ridicule, gnawed at her. But beneath the uncertainty and doubt, Aisha couldn't shake the feeling that what mattered most was her own happiness, her own sense of fulfillment. Saif had shown her a side of life that was real, one that wasn't built on pretensions or the approval of others. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that society's view of success wasn't hers to carry. Still, the social pressure was overwhelming. It was a battle between her heart and the opinions of everyone around her. Would she stand firm, or would she succumb to the weight of others' expectations? The unconventional partner. Saif was nothing like the men Aisha's family had envisioned for her. He didn't have a prestigious job title, an expensive car, or a family lineage that could be traced back to generations of prominence. He wasn't the kind of man who would be paraded in front of the extended family during weddings or formal events. And that was exactly what made him an unconventional choice in their eyes. When Aisha introduced Saif to her family for the first time, it was evident that her relatives didn't know what to make of him. He was wearing simple, worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, not the tailored suit or formal attire they expected of someone who was worthy of a woman like Aisha. His hands were rough from years of working in a garage, and his hair was unruly, not the carefully styled look that her family admired. But what they didn't see, what they failed to recognize, were the qualities that made Saif stand out in Aisha's eyes. He wasn't refined in the way they had imagined for her, but he was thoughtful, kind, and incredibly hardworking. Saif had grown up in a modest neighborhood, working alongside his father at a local mechanic shop, learning the trade from a young age. He had dreams of one day owning his own shop and expanding his business, but he didn't wear his ambitions as a badge of honor. He worked quietly, day by day, and he took pride in his work, something that Aisha admired deeply. The first time Aisha saw him working on a car, she was struck by his patience and attention to detail. He wasn't just fixing things, he was carefully restoring them to their best condition, pouring all his focus and energy into his craft. He took pride in making something broken whole again, and there was a certain artistry to it. It wasn't the kind of job that would make headlines, but to Saif, it was enough. And that was something Aisha found both rare and beautiful. To Aisha, Saif's humility and sincerity were qualities that mattered far more than his outward appearance or social status. He didn't need the approval of others because he was content with who he was, with the life he was building on his own. He didn't seek validation from high society or from anyone around him. He believed in working hard, being honest, and doing what was right, principles that Aisha held dear. But to her family and friends, Saif's lack of credentials was something that couldn't be overlooked. "He's just a mechanic, Aisha," her cousin Zara would say with a dismissive laugh. "What does he even know about life outside of his garage? He doesn't have the connections, the social standing, or the ambition to match your potential." Even Aisha's parents, who had tried to be supportive, couldn't help but voice their concerns. Aisha, you're an educated woman with so much potential. Do you really want to tie yourself down to someone who's so ordinary? Her mother asked, her words laced with worry. You deserve someone who can help you reach greater heights. Saif's simplicity and grounded nature were lost on those who couldn't see beyond the surface. His life had been shaped by a different set of values, values that didn't rely on status or wealth. In a world obsessed with appearances, where a man's worth was measured by his bank account or his family name, Saif seemed like a poor match for someone like Aisha. They didn't understand that he wasn't looking for accolades, he was looking for someone who shared his values, someone who appreciated the quieter, more meaningful parts of life. But Aisha knew. She saw beyond the material things that others seemed so obsessed with. She saw Saif's integrity, his loyalty, and his genuine kindness, things that couldn't be measured by money or status. And it was these qualities that made him the perfect match for her. Every time her family ridiculed Saif, Aisha felt a pang of discomfort. It wasn't just about defending him. It was about defending her own heart, her own choices. The truth was, Aisha didn't need a partner who could impress the world. She needed someone who could make her laugh, who understood her ambition and respected her independence, and someone who was willing to stand beside her through it all, no matter how unconventional the journey might be. Despite the misunderstandings and dismissals, Aisha stood by her decision, because deep down, she knew that Saif's worth wasn't something that could be measured by traditional standards. It was measured by the depth of his character, his unshakable integrity, and the quiet strength he brought into her life, and for her, that was more than enough. Conflicts and struggles. The weeks following Aisha's engagement felt like an emotional battlefield. The harsh whispers, the cold stares, and the constant barrage of criticism from those she loved and respected began to weigh on her. Every conversation with her family was laced with concern, doubt, and judgment. Every time she left the house with Saif, she felt the prying eyes of neighbors, the subtle yet piercing whispers about her choices. It felt as if the world was closing in on her, and the once firm foundation of her confidence began to crack under the pressure. It wasn't just the direct comments that stung, it was the way people looked at her, like she was somehow less than she was before, as if her worth had suddenly diminished because she had chosen a partner who didn't meet their standards. The endless questions from her parents, the disappointment in her father's eyes, and the quiet disapproval from her mother had begun to chip away at her resolve. They didn't understand. They couldn't. To them, Saif was just a mechanic, a man who would never be able to offer her the life they had always dreamed for her. And no matter how much Aisha tried to explain, they refused to see beyond that. Aisha, you have so much potential. You deserve someone who can give you the world, not someone like him, her mother would say, her voice heavy with worry. Every word felt like a blade cutting deeper into Aisha's heart. She had always been a woman of conviction, someone who had defied the norm and chosen her own path. But now, with Saif by her side, she was questioning everything. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been too naive, too idealistic. Was she really making the right decision? Was she being foolish, clinging to an idea of love that couldn't stand the test of time? These thoughts crept into her mind, gnawing at her confidence, especially when she saw the look of concern in her father's eyes. At work, things weren't much better. She overheard her colleagues discussing her engagement, their voices dripping with condescension. Aisha marrying a mechanic? One of her co-workers, Simran, laughed. What's next? Will you be living in a small apartment in a poor neighborhood? The laughter and ridicule seemed endless, each comment a reminder of how different her life was from the expectations placed upon her. It wasn't just about Saif anymore. It was about everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for in her life. Her dreams of being independent, of building a career, of finding love on her own terms, were all suddenly in question. She had become the subject of gossip, and the weight of those judgments seemed unbearable. Even her closest friends, the ones she had shared her dreams and hopes with for years, began to distance themselves. Are you sure about this, Aisha? I mean, you could do better. maybe you should take some time and really think this through, Misha had said, her tone uncertain. I just want you to be happy, and I don't know if Saif is the right person for you. Every word they spoke, every question they raised, planted seeds of doubt in Aisha's mind. Could Saif really give her the life she wanted? Could he offer her the stability she needed? Was love enough to sustain them in the face of such overwhelming criticism? She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. The emotional toll was exhausting. She had always prided herself on her ability to make decisions based on what felt right. But now she was questioning everything she had stood for. The pressure to conform, to make her family and society proud, seemed like an impossible mountain to climb. But as the doubts crept in, a quiet voice within her reminded her of why she had chosen Saif in the first place. It wasn't about wealth, status, or external validation. It was about love, respect, and shared values. Saif had never promised her the world, but he had promised to be there for her, to support her dreams, and to love her with an unwavering sincerity. He had shown her a kind of love that didn't need to prove itself to anyone, a love that was built on mutual understanding and trust. Aisha knew that she couldn't let the opinions of others dictate her life. The emotional toll of the criticism was heavy, but she refused to let it break her. With every word of judgment, she found herself growing stronger, more determined to follow her own path. Her family's disapproval, her friends' doubts, they were not her truth. What mattered was the life she envisioned, the future she wanted to build with Saif. And despite the emotional turmoil, Aisha realized that she had to trust herself. She had to stand firm in her beliefs, in her love for Saif, and in her own worth. In the end, the struggle wasn't just about defending Saif, it was about defending her own right to choose her happiness. And no matter how hard the journey became, she was determined to fight for that. The wedding day. The morning of Aisha's wedding was a whirlwind of emotions. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate veil that framed her face, and tried to steady her racing heart. The weight of the day, the culmination of months of second-guessing, ridicule, and silent battles, felt heavy on her shoulders. This was the moment when everything would come to a head, when she would stand before her family, her friends, and the world, and prove that she was not backing down. Outside, the traditional wedding celebrations were in full swing, but Aisha knew that many of those present had come out of a sense of duty, not approval. Her relatives milled about the hall, exchanging whispers, exchanging glances that were filled with judgment, some with quiet disapproval, others with barely veiled mockery. They had come because they had to, because it was family, but it was evident that as they exchanged rings, the room fell silent. Even though the undercurrent of judgment still lingered, Aisha's heart soared. She knew this was the beginning of something real. The people in the room might not have understood it yet, but she did. She had chosen a life that was true to herself, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. The wedding was not the grand affair her family had imagined. There were no lavish decorations, no extravagant displays of wealth, and no social prestige. But for Aisha and Saif, it was perfect. It was a testament to their love, love that had defied every expectation, and love that, despite all the mockery, would stand the test of time. Surprise twist. Months passed after Aisha and Saif's wedding, and while the couple's life together was quiet and simple, it began to unfold in ways no one had expected. The murmurs from their families and friends had faded, but a lingering skepticism still hovered in the air. It wasn't that anyone wished them ill, but the doubts and judgments of the past still haunted those who had once ridiculed their union. However, what no one could have predicted was how Saif's qualities would soon make themselves undeniable. He had always been hardworking, dedicated, and humble, but these traits had never truly been understood by Aisha's family or community until they saw them in action. The subtle shift began when Saif's mechanic shop, once a small operation, began to grow steadily. It wasn't the fast, flashy success that many expected, but it was solid, reliable, and built on the trust of his customers. Saif had never sought fame or recognition, but over time, his reputation began to spread. Word of his work ethic, his honesty, and his commitment to quality service traveled through the community. People started coming from neighboring areas to have their cars serviced by him because they had heard about how he went above and beyond for his clients. Aisha watched as his shop expanded, not just in size, but in its importance to the community. What had once seemed like a lowly job was now seen as an essential, respected service. Saif's work was more than just fixing cars. It was about building relationships, about making promises to his customers and delivering on them. But the true test came when Aisha's father's car broke down one afternoon, and he reluctantly took it to Saif's shop, fully aware of his prior reservations. When he walked in, Saif greeted him with the same warmth and professionalism he extended to every customer, despite the tension that still lingered between them. Aisha's father watched, impressed, as Saif handled the repairs with precision, all while explaining the process patiently and offering solutions rather than pushing unnecessary services. He could see that Saif's knowledge went far beyond the technical. It was his integrity, his willingness to go the extra mile, that set him apart. Later that evening, her father called Aisha. "I just wanted to tell you, I took the car to Saif's shop today," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "And I have to admit, he's a good man. I've never seen anyone work as diligently as he does, or with as much care. I underestimated him." Aisha felt a wave of relief and pride. It was a small victory, but it was a significant one. Her father's approval was important to her, and this moment felt like the beginning of a new chapter for him. He was beginning to see what she had always known, that Saif was someone with not only the drive to succeed, but the character to match. Over the next few months, the tide began to shift in Saif's favor. People who had once scoffed at him now sought his advice, not just for car repairs, but for guidance in their own professional lives. He was a man who had built something from nothing, who had earned the respect of his community through his quiet, unwavering determination. The opinions of others began to change. Aisha's relatives, who had once ridiculed her choice, began to talk about Saif in a different light. "He's made something of himself," they would say, their voices tinged with surprise. "He's built a business from the ground up." It wasn't just about his business success, though. Saif's personal qualities, the ones Aisha had seen from the start, began to shine through in his relationships. He was the kind of man who remembered the small details: a neighbor's child's birthday, an old friend's sick relative, a colleague's tough day. He was generous with his time, his energy, and his kindness. And soon, the community that had once underestimated him was now rallying behind him. Aisha's friends, who had once cautioned her about marrying beneath her, were the next to rethink their judgments. Misha, who had voiced her doubts, came over one afternoon for tea, her tone now filled with respect. "Aisha, I have to admit, I was wrong," she said, sitting down with a smile. "Saif is remarkable. I don't think I understood how much he had to offer. I see now what you saw in him." For Aisha, it was a moment of quiet triumph. She had always known that Saif was the right man for her, not because of his job or his social standing, but because of his character, his integrity, and his unwavering support for her. Now, the world around them was slowly starting to understand. As the months turned into years, Aisha and Saif's life together became a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and staying true to oneself. Their marriage, once ridiculed and doubted, became an example of success, not because of external achievements, but because of the strength of their partnership. Aisha's family, her friends, and even the community had begun to see the truth: that Saif was not just a mechanic, but a man of exceptional worth. And in time, the very people who had once judged them began to admire them, their eyes opened to the quiet beauty of a love that defied convention. In the end, Aisha and Saif's marriage wasn't just a success, it was a victory for authenticity. It proved that real love wasn't about conforming to societal expectations, but about finding someone whose values, heart, and spirit matched your own. And through it all, Aisha realized that sometimes the greatest success comes from simply staying true to who you are, regardless of what the world might think. Personal growth and strength. As the months passed and Aisha's life with Saif unfolded in ways that no one had predicted, she began to realize something profound. Her journey wasn't just about defying societal norms, it was about discovering her own strength, trusting her instincts, and embracing the happiness she had found, even if it didn't align with society's expectations. In the early days of her marriage, Aisha had been weighed down by the judgment of others. It wasn't easy to silence the voices that had whispered doubts into her ear, the voices of her family, friends, and colleagues who believed she had made a mistake. But as time went on and she saw the true depth of Saif's character, Aisha began to shed the layers of insecurity that had once clouded her decisions. She had chosen him, not because of his social standing, but because of the kindness, the patience, and the unwavering support he had shown her from the start. Each day spent with Saif, watching him work tirelessly to build his business, to support his family, to be a man of integrity, helped Aisha grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. She saw how he cared for those around him, how he treated everyone with respect, whether they were a millionaire or a mechanic like himself. It wasn't about how much money he had or what others thought of him. It was about who he was at his core. And slowly, Aisha started to see her own reflection in the light of their relationship. A woman who had chosen to live life on her own terms, a woman who was no longer afraid of standing up for her happiness. The more she witnessed Saif's dedication and strength, the more confident she became in her own choices. No longer did she feel the need to apologize for her marriage. No longer did she need validation from others. She had found her happiness, and it wasn't something that could be measured by anyone else's standards. It was rooted in the quiet moments they shared, the laughter, the support, the comfort of knowing they were in this together, no matter what. In conversations with her family, where once she had been defensive, Aisha now spoke with quiet confidence. When her relatives spoke of Saif's unsuitability or questioned his lack of wealth, she didn't feel the need to explain or justify herself anymore. She had come to understand that their judgments weren't a reflection of her choices, but of their own limited view of the world. She had learned to listen without absorbing their negativity, to stand firm in her truth without seeking their approval. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Saif after a long day, Aisha reflected on how far she had come. She had once worried that her happiness would be measured by the things people saw as important: money, status, prestige. But now she knew that true happiness didn't need external validation. It was about peace of mind, about finding someone who truly understood her, and about building a life that was authentic, free from the pressures of the world's expectations. I used to care so much about what people thought, Aisha said to Saif, her voice steady. But now, I realize I'm only happy when I'm true to myself. Saif smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. And that's all that matters, Aisha. Your happiness is yours to create, not theirs to judge. And in those simple words, Aisha found the strength she had been searching for all along. She had learned that happiness wasn't about conforming to what others wanted for her, but about embracing what brought her joy, what felt right in her heart. As the years went by, Aisha's growth continued. She became more confident in her career, her decisions, and her ability to stand up for herself. She realized that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Her marriage to Saif, once seen as a failure in the eyes of many, had turned into a beautiful success, not because of how the world saw it, but because it was built on love, respect, and mutual growth. Aisha's transformation was remarkable. She had started out questioning herself, unsure of the path she had chosen, but now she was a woman who stood strong in her choices, who had learned to trust herself and her heart. Her growth was not just in the success of her marriage, but in the way she carried herself, the way she lived her life with courage and authenticity. She was no longer the woman who had been swayed by the judgments of others. She was now a woman who knew her worth, who had created her own happiness, and who had the strength to follow her heart, no matter the obstacles in her way. And in the end, Aisha proved that happiness doesn't have to align with society's expectations. It doesn't have to fit into a neat, prescribed box. It's personal, unique, and often it's found when you're brave enough to walk your own path, regardless of what the world says. Aisha had done just that, and her life was richer for it. Reactions from the mockers. As Aisha's life with Saif flourished, the very people who had once mocked her decisions began to face a shift in perspective. At first, it was subtle. They watched from the sidelines, unsure of what to say, waiting for her marriage to fail as they had predicted. But when the months turned into years, and Aisha's quiet confidence continued to grow, they couldn't ignore the reality before them. She had made the right choice. The first sign of this shift came from Aisha's cousins, who had once made their judgments loud and clear. A few months after the wedding, one of them, Zainab, reached out. Aisha had expected the usual comments, but this time, Zainab's tone was different. "I need to apologize, Aisha," Zainab said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't understand. I thought you were making a huge mistake, but seeing how happy you are with Saif, well, I was wrong." Aisha was taken aback at first, but then she smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. "Thank you, Zainab," she said simply. "It means a lot to hear that." Zainab continued, her words tinged with regret. "I let the opinions of others cloud my judgment. I saw what you had with him and dismissed it. I thought you could have done better, but now I see what you saw in him. He's a good man. I'm sorry for doubting you." Aisha knew that for Zainab, it wasn't easy to admit that she had been wrong. The pride and ego that had once driven her to mock Aisha's choice now made way for humility. But that wasn't the case for everyone. Not everyone who had mocked Aisha was willing to admit their mistake. Some, like her aunt, refused to acknowledge the success of her marriage, clinging to their outdated beliefs about what made a union acceptable. One day, at a family gathering, Aisha's aunt couldn't help herself. "Well, I suppose things have worked out for you, but don't get too comfortable. This can't last forever," she said with a faint sneer, her eyes narrowing as she watched Aisha and Saif interact. Aisha could feel the tension in the air, but this time she didn't feel the need to defend her marriage. She had nothing to prove. Saif's quiet confidence spoke for itself, and so did the strength of their bond. Instead of reacting with frustration or anger, Aisha simply smiled, her voice calm but firm. "I've learned that happiness isn't about meeting anyone's expectations," she said, her words measured but filled with conviction. "It's about staying true to yourself, and that's what I've done, and I'm happy." Her aunt shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. Aisha could see that the old guard wasn't ready to let go of their preconceived notions. Some people, no matter how much time passed, would always hold on to their judgments, unwilling to accept the reality of the life Aisha had built. But there were others who, like Zainab, began to see the truth. Her old friend Misha, who had once cautioned her against marrying Saif, was another to come around. Months after the wedding, Misha called her tone softer now, tinged with regret. "Aisha, I just wanted to say I was wrong. I honestly didn't think it would work out. I thought you were settling, but I've seen how hard Saif works, how dedicated he is to you and your life together," Misha said, her voice sincere. "I'm sorry for doubting you." Aisha smiled, grateful for the words, but no longer needing them to validate her choices. "It's okay, Misha. I know you were only looking out for me, but I'm happy with the choice I made. It wasn't easy, but it was mine." The apology came as a pleasant surprise, but Aisha had long stopped seeking validation from others. She had built a life with Saif, one that brought her more joy and peace than she had ever imagined. But there was something satisfying about seeing the people who had once doubted her now acknowledge the strength of her decision. The world may have laughed at her marriage, but the joke was now on them. Even those who remained skeptical couldn't ignore the undeniable truth. Aisha and Saif were doing better than anyone had expected. Their love wasn't perfect by the world's standards, but it was real, and it was enough. Some people, however, never fully let go of their disbelief. Aisha's father's younger brother, Imran, was one such person. He continued to shake his head when the topic of Saif's success came up, still convinced that a mechanic could never truly succeed in the eyes of the world. His refusal to accept the change was apparent every time they spoke about Aisha and Saif's future. "I just don't get it," Imran muttered at a family gathering one evening. "How did he go from being a mechanic to owning multiple workshops? It's just luck, that's all." Aisha's heart sank, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she turned to Saif, who was calmly listening to the conversation, his face a picture of quiet patience. She squeezed his hand gently, a silent signal that they were in this together. "I guess sometimes," Aisha said, her voice clear and confident, "luck has a way of finding the people who work hard for it." Imran remained silent, his pride too strong to admit that he had been wrong. But Aisha no longer cared about his opinion. She had come to a place where the only approval she needed was her own, and the quiet pride in her heart, knowing she had chosen the right man for herself, was more than enough. For the mockers, the shift came slowly. Some took years to admit their mistake, while others remained resolute in their disbelief. But in the end, Aisha didn't need their approval or apologies. She had found her happiness, and that was the greatest triumph of all. The last laugh. Years had passed since Aisha had first faced the mockery and disbelief of her family and friends. The world that had once ridiculed her marriage now watched in awe as she continued to live a life she had carefully built, one that was rooted in love, resilience, and authenticity. Aisha and Saif's life together was a testament to the power of following one's heart, regardless of the opinions of others. Their small home, filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft hum of Saif's work in the garage, had become a sanctuary of happiness. The simple joys they shared, cooking meals together, sitting on the porch after a long day, or just talking about their dreams, were enough to fill their lives with contentment. Despite all the obstacles they had faced, Aisha had learned to stand firm in her choices. Her once hesitant voice, shaped by the pressure of societal expectations, had grown strong and unapologetic. She had come to realize that happiness didn't lie in conforming to what others thought she should be. It came from the freedom of living life as her authentic self. One afternoon, Aisha and Saif sat at a family gathering, a small but significant milestone in their journey. Her father, who had once feared that Aisha's marriage to Saif would lead to disappointment, now beamed with pride. He had seen how Saif's integrity and hard work had not only built a successful business, but had also created a happy home for his daughter. Aisha's once critical relatives and friends had softened, some of them even expressing genuine admiration for the life she had chosen. And yet, there were still moments when the past crept in. Aisha's aunt, who had never fully let go of her skepticism, made a remark about how it was surprising that Saif's business had flourished. But Aisha didn't flinch. She had long since stopped seeking approval from anyone, least of all from those who had once doubted her. With a quiet smile, she simply said, "It's not about luck, Auntie. It's about building something that matters, with hard work and dedication. Saif and I have built this life together, and it's been worth every moment." The look on her aunt's face was enough to tell Aisha that the old doubts were still there, but she didn't care. She had already had the last laugh. Aisha's life was rich in ways that no one had expected, rich with love, peace, and the fulfillment of knowing she had made the right choices for herself. Her marriage to Saif, which had once been laughed at and mocked, had turned into a beautiful success, not because of the world's standards, but because it was a success to them. They were content, happy in each other's company, and proud of what they had built together. The message was clear: following one's heart, trusting in love, and staying true to oneself was always worth it. Aisha had been the brunt of jokes, the subject of ridicule, but she had never wavered. She had found her happiness in a place that others had never understood. Now the world was beginning to see what she had known all along. As Aisha stood beside Saif, her hand in his, looking out at the life they had made, she realized that the laughter of her mockers had been nothing more than a fleeting sound in the distance. Her laughter was the one that had stood the test of time, the one that had lasted through the years. The life she had fought for, the love she had chosen, had proven to be the only thing that mattered. She had truly had the last laugh,